I'm going to talk to you about visuals in your presentation. Linda talked about the content, so I'm going to talk to you about visuals. If I told you our society is very visually oriented, are there any images that come to your mind? Commercials? Yeah. What else? Anything? YouTube? Yeah. So, a lot of times people say television commercials, logos, mobile devices. The point I want to make here is you want to use pictures to your advantage. A picture is worth 1,000 words. And so what you want to do is get good images that really convey the essence of what you're saying on the slide. So that way, it reinforces what you're saying. If you really think about it, people tend to be quite visual in their memory and in their comprehension and absorbing information. In fact, humans can absorb a tremendous amount of information visually. Speaking of commercials, how long are most ads on television? 30 seconds. I mean, now they're even doing 15. And I think in the Super Bowl a year or two ago, they did 1 second commercials. And actually, you could actually figure out what they did in 1 second, too, which is amazing. But they have 30 seconds. And they can use everything to their advantage. Image, music, the right story, the right emotion. And so you have 15 minutes. You might think, oh my God, I have an eternity. But you're going to say, I wish I had another 15 minutes. I guarantee it. You never have enough time. But so what you want to do is you want to use all the things to your advantage when you're doing a presentation. Visuals are a big part of it. And the other thing you want to do is you want to make your presentation interesting. Trust me, when you're up here as a judge, you have 8 presentations, is that it? 8? After a while, they start blurring together. And so whatever you can do to make it interesting, part of it's visual. That's not all of it. The other part's how you tell your story, how you convey it. And what you're really communicating, that's what's going to make a difference. But the visuals part make a big part of it as well, as we'll talk about. You want to have a consistent format, a look, your logo, you want to identify with you, because you want to make sure they keep a clear understanding of your presentation versus the next one or the next one. Because after a while, they'll start blurring together. And you don't want that. You want to have them have a distinct impression of what it is you said and what you did. You want to stand out from the crowd. And so you have to stand out among 8 different presentations. And of course, you're all going to be doing that. So, the competition's even ratcheted up even higher. But I think you'll see a difference when you start watching each other. They did a study, and they found that, presentations with visuals tend to be shorter and more productive. But I can tell you, all of you are from various backgrounds, countries, and so on, but we all have one thing in common. And that is we have a limited amount of time. And so whatever you can do to convey information in a short amount of time effectively, it's going to be to your advantage. And the other thing is, when you're up here and the audience is there, there's always something competing for their attention. Whether it's the fan, or they're thinking it's close to dinner time, what am I going to eat tonight? Oh, so-and-so didn't call me, I didn't get that email. These are all these competing thoughts that are always going to occur, and they're going to jump in whenever they can. And when they do is when you make the audience work to listen to you or watch what you're doing, or you basically give them an opportunity to disconnect. Look at your notes. That's a great time. They're going to disconnect. They figure if you're disconnected, I'll be disconnected. So, all those things really make a big difference. So, good visuals will help you be very professional, and they'll help you be better prepared. I think we talked earlier about how much time you're going to spend on the presentation part versus the content part. I can tell you it always takes longer. And part of it is because what you really should be doing is when you're preparing a presentation, which perspective should you be using when you do your presentation preparation?
The audience.
The audience, absolutely. You should be thinking not as an expert of your business. We know you're an expert of your business or your idea. You should be thinking, all right, these are a set of judges. They're probably wondering, what is my idea about? What does it do? What does it solve? You're going to have an objective. You should absolutely have an objective. What's going to be your objective in your presentation? Let me ask you this one. How many of you like to sell? Oh, half hands. I have half hands who like to sell. Well, what are you doing at the competition?
Selling.
What are you selling? Yourself. Yeah, you're absolutely selling yourself. You're going to sell yourself, your team. I'll tell you, half the half the challenge in business is getting them to like you. And you basically want them to say, I want to do business with these people. I might not love their idea, I might not think it's the greatest thing, but I think they're great people, I want to work with them, I can make it better. You want to get them to like you. So that's number one. Selling your software. What else are you selling?
Business idea.
You're going to sell your product or service or whatever it is you want to sell. But in order to do that, you really have to do a couple of things. What's the first thing you really should clearly establish that you're doing with your product or service?
Making the world a better place.
That's good. But even more focused than that, you should be solving a problem. Right? You should be somehow solving a problem. And in order for you to solve the problem, what do they need to understand?
The problem.
Exactly. They need to clearly understand the problem you're solving. So if you clearly articulate the problem, and you clearly articulate your solution, your product or service should be perfect, right? That's what you should be thinking. And in fact, when you're doing presentations, I'd actually tell you, put your computer away. Don't even start with PowerPoint. Because a lot of times what ends up happening, people start with PowerPoint, and they start working with words, and I want this graphic, or I want that. And they're not really thinking conceptually about the whole presentation. You have 15 minutes. What is it I want to convey in 15 minutes? Right? You want to convey a story. You want to convey something from a beginning to an end. And so you should really start thinking this conceptually. How can I convey all these ideas conceptually? Then come to your PowerPoint. And then that's where the preparation takes a long time to do that. Because if you've done the other part, then the PowerPoint part's going to be easy. But the other part takes time, which is thinking out what is it you really want to convey? What's the visual picture you want them to walk through? And once you can come up with that, then your PowerPoint stuff will go a lot faster and a lot easier. So think about it that way. And you do want to be persuasive. You want to convince them that your idea, your product, is the best one of the 8. Right? And it might be also the best one of the competitors out in the marketplace, because you're going to have to do that too. Not just the 8, but also your competition and other options your audience would have. Right? So you want to convince them. Good visuals, good presentation style is going to help you become more credible and professional. And that's what you want. We talked about group presentations. I think you really need to think about choreography of the stage. If you have 2 screens, like today, for example, we had the option of 2 screens. So if I'm here or here, usually I'm in a light, and it's shining on me, and it's really a distraction to me. And you don't really need 2 screens. Maybe in that room it's a little bit bigger. It might be easier because you have judges. You'll have to judge and make a decision on that. But you should think about choreography, where you put presenters and non-presenters. You know, all those things make a difference. Because what's your most important visual? You and your team. And the audience is an interesting thing. When you're presenting and your teammates are over here talking, where are they paying attention to? Over there, yeah. It's like a test. Is my hearing really good? I can hear them and not the presenter? And that's when they're going to have a disconnect with you. So really be careful as non-presenters what you're doing or not doing, because it can really be a distraction or not. Right? So, but you want to do whatever you can to make your presentations interesting. Because I can tell you, after a while, business presentations get boring. Bar graph after bar graph after pie chart, they just get boring. So do whatever you can to make it interesting, engaging, and make it come alive. Again, that's where those stories and examples will really make a big difference. Aha. People tend to remember about 10% of what they read, about 20% of what they hear, but you can, and about 30% of what they see. But when you combine what they see and they hear, you can up their retention about 50%. So that's why you really want to make sure what you say and what you show are in complete sync. And that's a big problem I see a lot of times with presentations. People are showing things and saying things that are not using the same words, but they're talking about something. There's a disconnect. And what happens when there's a disconnect, the audience is going, I'm listening to them, but that slide doesn't make sense, or I can't read it, or I can't see it properly. And so there's a disconnect. And at some point they get frustrated, and that's when those other competing thoughts are going to come in, and you're going to completely lose them. So this is really, really important. What you say and what you show should really sync up. almost to the point when you're saying it should be coming up. So really make sure, and you don't have to show everything that you're talking about, but you want to have the key things up there. And that's also obviously helpful to you. If you lose your place temporarily, you can glance at the screen, recompose, and get back. You don't have to look at your notes. It's okay to take a second to look at the screen, because the audience needs time to absorb your information too. They can't absorb everything. They need pauses and breaks just like you do. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I often get accused of talking too fast. So hopefully, I've been working on that, so hopefully I'm not talking too fast today for you. There are all kinds of visuals. Most of you are going to be using PowerPoint, which is fine, or even Keynote. But I don't want you to lose sight of other options you have, especially to engage and interact with the audience. You have the board up here. It's a great way to maybe show something on the fly in a Q&A. Let me show you how this relationship works, all right? Or some other way. Or you might even want to do it as you're interacting and participating with the judges. You ask them for participation, and you put down their input on the board. So think of other ways to also convey thoughts and ideas, not just with PowerPoint. I'll give you an example. I want you to close your eyes for a second. Close your eyes. I want you to imagine yourself on the beach. You woke up today in Cancun, and you felt the sunrise going across the water, hitting your toes, the warmth coming up your legs, up your body, and up to your face. All right, wake up. This is the hard part, getting you just to wake up. But I bet you all had a better picture of the beach in Cancun than I could ever create on a slide here. All right? So I want you to be creative, do interesting things to make things come alive. Maybe that's a way you can really highlight the problem you're solving with your product or service. So yes, you're going to use PowerPoints and visuals up here, but don't be only limited by that. What you really want, again, go back to the preparation stage. Think of the concepts you want to convey, and then think of what's the best way to convey that concept. Right? Maybe your team can interact, so do a little bit of role play. I'd be a little careful in business presentations because sometimes some judges and some audiences don't think that's professional, but it depends on how you carry it off and how you do it. It could be effective. If you want to try it, you're welcome to. For next Tuesday, you'll get feedback from the coaches, and you can see if it worked for you or not. But again, be cautious. Sometimes some audiences don't like it. But there's so many other methods: overhead, slides, flip charts, the board. It all boils down to interaction and being ability to do things on the fly. So just think of different ways to do different things as opposed to just one way. What visuals can do for you, they can help you reach your objective. They can help you be very organized for yourself and for the audience. But they can't pace or do all the convincing for you. All right? You are your most important visuals. Your visuals are there to enhance you, not replace you. So keep that in mind. A lot of people want to, especially if people are nervous, they want to rely on the visuals to do all the work for them. That's a bad strategy. You're your most important visual. They're just there to be basically support and reinforce the concepts, the stories, the things you're conveying. They're not there to replace you. Here's some basic rules. And I'll tell you, rule number one is probably the hardest for most people, and that is keeping it simple. And I'm sure you've been in situations, probably at the university. It happens everywhere. You know the professor knows their stuff. They're an expert in their field. But when it comes to conveying things in a simple format to bring you up to a level of expertise, there's a disconnect. So that's where you're going to have a challenge. You're going to be an expert in your product or service, but now you have to come up with a way to actually get the judges to feel and visualize what it is you're proposing as a solution or a product. And that's what you have to do. And you have to do it in a simple, concise manner. And the other thing most people do is they don't keep this in mind. That is that less is more. You have 15 minutes in your presentation. What do you think are probably the most realistic, how many concepts, aside from your product, or let's say if you had to convey different concepts, how many different key ideas or concepts do you think are probably realistically could you do in 15 minutes? Mm-hmm. If you had to give me a quantity, how many do you think you could do well? 3. Anybody else? Agree? Disagree? 5? I'd say the range is probably 3 to 5, but I lean towards 3. And the reason is because you'd probably do a better job with 3 than you could with 5. because you'll have more time to tell stories, examples, and make those 3 really come alive than you could make those 5 really come alive. And the thing is, people are very limited to what they can remember anyways. So if you can get them to remember 3, that's amazing. So what most people end up doing is they have too much content. So they put too much material in. And so then they speed up, right? Because they've already put themselves at a dead fan. They have 25 minutes of content, but only 15 minutes to present. So most people speed up, right? They speed up, and that's when they start losing the audience. And they still never finish. And I can tell you, the person who decided, I'm only going to concentrate on 3 things, because they're only going to remember and only going to retain what you tell them. They're not going to remember what you left out, right? So you're better off concentrating on a few things and making sure they really understand and remember it than you are to make sure they remember too many things. So that's why less is more. Really keep that in mind when you're doing your presentation, because it's really there is a natural barrier people have in retaining and holding information. Strive to enhance each point. And if you have fewer points, you'll be able to enhance them. And again, as Linda said, you're going to have to repeat them several times. Saying it one time is just not going to be enough. People need to feel it. They need to see it. They need to feel it again. They need to hear it and see it many different ways. The same thing. And try to come up with a consistent format for your presentation. You have a certain look and feel that's consistent all the way through, so that they can remember your presentation. Just like logos, just like in commercials, you have a certain look and feel. And try to use consistent readable typeface. And I'll talk more about typefaces in a second. But I'll tell you, the number one thing is a lot of times with typefaces, and I think it's the next point, or later on, but you really need to maintain a contrast. If you're going to use very light fonts, you need a dark background, and vice versa. And a lot of times people don't think about the contrast in their presentation. It makes a big difference. And you also have to be cognizant. The way you see it on your computer can often be different the way it's on a projector. You'll get more contrast on a computer than you will on a projector. So you need to have even sharper contrast on these projectors. And especially because you have lights in here as well. And try to really come up with easy to remember points. And obviously check your spelling. It's one of those things that, I suffer from it too. You've been working with a presentation for a long time, and the first thing, you've gone through it millions of times and you see no typos. As soon as you put up the slide, what's the first thing the audience sees? That typo. They see it in a second. And that immediately affects your professionalism and your credibility. So 2 tricks. 1, maybe have someone else look at your presentations that's never seen it. And 2, read your presentation backwards. As we get so used to looking at it in a certain way, read it backwards at least once so you can maybe catch things that you haven't caught before. But at least make sure you do that. And I want you to think in billboards. I don't want you to think in slides. I want you to think in billboards. And basically, with a billboard, you need to convey the message in 3 to 5 seconds. Because you're driving by or something, and that's what you need to think about when you have slides up here. Think in billboards and convey. The message visually should be conveyed in 3 to 5 seconds. Now, that doesn't mean you can't make it come alive with a story or an example or something. You can do that. But they shouldn't have to struggle with your visuals and try to make sense of it. They should be able to do that very quickly.
What if you're using a quote that's obviously going to have to be something that they're going to read? You can highlight sections of it or something like that, but what recommendations would you have?
That's fine. I'd still keep quotes, not super long quotes, or break it up.
Okay.
And really think about, do you really need that entire quote? Because if you are going to do it, are you going to read it, or are you going to have them read it? Right? Because if it's a really long quote, you're going to have to give time for them to read it. They're not listening to you. So really think about, is that quote really going to serve you well? Or is there another way to maybe make it more concise? Again, make it concise, but don't lose content, right? Fewer words, but don't lose the content. And try to think in landscape instead of portrait. This is a slide. That is a document. And when you end up doing documents, you tend to have lists. That's not as much of an issue with PowerPoint, but it does become an issue if you use other things. Other, like overheads. We used to, before we had this new business school, we used to always do presentations with overheads because we just didn't have the equipment. And so a lot of times with overheads, you'd end up doing things in a portrait instead of landscape. And as a result, people tend to make things very long list documents. So avoid that. Here's a basic rule of layout. Try to use 6 words per line. Again, this isn't a hard, fast rule. This is just guidelines. But try not to have more than 6 words per line. I probably wouldn't have more 6 lines per graphic. White space is just as important as the content on a slide. And really avoid overcrowding. A nice, clean, simple look is what's going to be a lot easier for you and the audience in preparing as well as conveying. So fonts do matter. Fonts convey a certain spirit, a certain style, certain sometimes emotion, but you also have to be careful. You have access to so many fonts. Sometimes people get a little too creative. And you're not going to get an award in having the most creative presentation. Maybe you can, but your goal here is to have the most effective presentation.